to speed up the approval of new drugs by charging fees to the drug industry to pay for additional FDA reviewers. But there are many other things added onto it. There's a drug safety provision. There's a provision to assure the testing of drugs in children. There's a medical device review provision. So there's several other pieces. And then some members of the Senate may well add additional amendments, which will make it perhaps a slow progress through the Senate.
Candy. Hundreds of drugs are being advertised with obviously many side effects that they have to tell us about in the advertising. And drugs like morphine, of course, are legal. Why is marijuana not legal, at least for medical use? Because it doesn't have very many negative side effects that they can find, and I don't think there's ever actually been anybody died from it.
Well, the caller raises several questions. I'll deal with the advertising question. This bill before the Senate does attempt to deal with advertising. Some consumers and physicians are worried that drug companies' ability to advertise directly on television to consumers is a problem, that it causes a consumer to rush out and ask their doctor for a drug they don't really need. The bill attempts to do that by placing a moratorium on direct-to-consumer advertisements for certain sort of high-risk drugs. And it also has a provision that whereby the industry would pay a fee to the FDA to have additional staff to review their ads before they go on the air. So there are some efforts in this bill to deal with drug advertising, but fundamentally the First Amendment likely would prohibit the FDA from banning advertising entirely.
Does this Senate bill address medical marijuana?
No, it does not, to my knowledge.
Our next call comes from Surrey, Virginia. Good morning.
Yes, ma'am. That was my question about the use of medical marijuana, because someone has been on all these drugs from Neurontin to fentanyl. I believe one reason is ease of manufacture. Just wondering his general opinions on the usage of it. Thank you.
Do you have an opinion on that?
Well, the medical marijuana issue has largely been managed by the Drug Enforcement Administration, not the FDA. The FDA had approved years ago a few special exceptions for people to use marijuana for medical purposes. But increasingly, there's been a sense that there are alternatives to that. And so medical marijuana has not generally been approved by the FDA for use. The Drug Enforcement Administration is the lead agency on that.
I've been getting my prescriptions for half or a third of the price from a reputable pharmacy in Canada through the mail. I have had no problems with anything that I've taken. Secondly, I would like to bring up the issue of prohibition. We all know it doesn't work. However, if we're going to prohibit some drugs, maybe we should prohibit them all. How about alcohol and tobacco, which not only is unhealthy, causes cirrhosis of the liver, heart problems, cancer. We know that these are harmful products, and they are on the market anyway. I never quite understood the hypocrisy of it and the contradiction of it. If we are believing that prohibition works, and of course I don't, but just let's say it does, then why are we not consistent about prohibiting harmful drugs?
Many Americans have purchased drugs from Canada and elsewhere, and they provide the sort of testimonials this caller provides. Unfortunately, FDA also has many examples of websites located in Latin America, Asia, Pacific Islands that say they're in Canada and that they will give you Canadian drugs and then lure you to purchase them there and then send you something that is not a Canadian drug, not an American drug, in some cases not a drug at all, just essentially an inert pill. So the dilemma for the consumer is you've got to know where you're going, and if you make a bad choice, you could injure yourself. And the FDA must say to these folks, if you go offshore and buy these drugs, we can't protect you because these are not drugs that we regulate.
Arlington, Virginia. Good morning.
Good morning. This is actually the first time I've ever called. I did want to correct a statement that was made by Mr. Hubbard. The FDA, this new bill, actually does include an amendment from Senator Coburn that would spread FDA's area of interest and control and give the Health Commission control over medical marijuana in states that have in fact approved it. And this could have some drastic effects on the caregivers and the patients in these states by all of a sudden having to be submitted to FDA approval as far as labeling goes. it would also have no regard to the orphan drug status of marijuana. And there is an amendment on this bill that does address medical marijuana in these states where it's approved.
What's your group's opinion about this amendment, the Coburn Amendment? And
I'm not familiar with it. There are a number of amendments being proposed, and the Senate's been going through a process of trying to reach agreement on limiting amendments, because obviously hundreds of amendments means the bill can't get through. And so this amendment may be one that would get a vote, or it may be an agreement that it's non-germane and therefore would not go to a vote. But I'm not familiar with that particular amendment. I understand that there are literally dozens of amendments lined up to be introduced. What agreement the leadership reaches on how many amendments will be allowed, I think is unclear at this point.
when will the Senate vote on the final
Well,
vote
it's
on this bill?
unclear. Again, if it was a so-called clean bill, if the bill that was marked up in committee recently were to reach a vote, that could happen quickly after a debate. But obviously, each amendment would need to be considered, debated, and then voted upon. And if there are dozens of those, that could tie up the Senate for weeks. And at some point, they could even be forced to pull the bill from the floor because they have other Senate business to go to. So I think it's unclear at this point as to what will happen.
Is there a House companion bill?
There is, but the House is further behind. The Senate will be acting on this bill first.